The beautiful, heart-wrenching, aesthetically pleasing, really gay world of Danmei. Some of you are probably looking at me like, what the hell is she talking about? But I'm pretty sure that happens with the majority of my videos. So a good chunk of you are likely Danmei fans yourselves, or at least familiar with it. Maybe it's your fandom-in-law. And even if you've never heard of Danmei before, I guarantee that if you're fairly active in fandom spaces online, you've at least seen something related to it, albeit unknowingly. So, what is it? Danmei, in a nutshell, is Chinese BL, boys love. Basically stories where the main romantic relationship is between two men, two very, very attractive men at that. The word Danmei literally means indulgence in or addiction to beauty. The genre is expansive with tons of different worlds, be it modern, sci-fi, historical, fantasy, subgenres, horror, comedy, true crime, and often features wuxia or xianxia settings. Wuxia is more grounded and takes place in a martial arts-based historical alternate universe, whereas xianxia is more otherworldly with fantasy elements like immortal beings and supernatural abilities that draw from Buddhism and Taoism. Over the years, Danmei's popularity has absolutely exploded, first where it originated in China and then more recently internationally. And that's led to a diverse, creative, very dedicated fandom that's on the rise and only getting bigger as more and more Danmei is becoming available to wider audiences. How did it happen? What's the fandom like? Why do people like Danmei so much? Danmei began as the result of Japanese BL making its way over to mainland China by way of Taiwan and Hong Kong in the 1990s. Pirated translations, mind you, due to strict Chinese government policies and prosecution. It circulated and began to gain a life of its own through fans creating their own stories for it, and by the end of the decade, several different Danmei forums sprung up online where fans could share their content with one another. An interesting difference between Japanese BL and Chinese Danmei is that manga is the preferred medium in Japan, whereas the novel is more favored in China. The online Chinese language publishing website, Jinjiang Literature City, which was founded in 1998 and began accepting original works in 2003, is one of the major hubs of Danmei today. Think of it as like Chinese Wattpad, where you can publish something there and then it can be picked up for commercialization and then distributed in a multimedia flash like after. The popularity of Jinjiang is partially attributed to making Danmei more accessible to a broader audience and pushing the subculture into the mainstream in China. The website was actually the launchpad for many of the most well-known works in the genre. Guardian, Faraway Wanderers, the drama is called Word of Honor. The Husky and his white cat Shizun, aka Tu-Ha, Grand Master of Demonic Cultivation, 魔道祖师 MDZS, the drama is called The Untamed, Heaven Official's Blessing, TGCF, and Scum Villain Self-Saving System, the latter three of which are all written by the author MXTX, 魔相同修, and are acknowledged to be many international fans' first exposure to Danmei, due to their many adaptations. Donghwas, which are Chinese animations, audio dramas, live actions, manhwas, which are like Japanese manga or Korean manhwa, and more recently, MXTX's works were the first to be officially translated and distributed in English. More popular Danmei works include Thousand Autumns, Peerless, Stars of Chaos, Remnants of Filth, Legend of Exorcism, Invitation to Wine, Breaking Through the Clouds, Little Mushroom, and Run Freely. Notable Danmei authors, many of which use aliases for privacy reasons, are Meat Bun, Priest, MXTX, T97, Meng Xishi, Wu Zi, Hui Shang, and Fei Tian Yixiang. Danmei can be distinguished as either Qingxue Wen, or pure water fiction, little to no sexual content, or Ruo Wen, raw fiction, which contains a lot of sexual content. Most content falls somewhere in between on the sliding scale. However, due to China's censorship of any content deemed harmful and vulgar, which includes anything non-heteronormative, not heterosexual, regardless of its level of explicitness, Danmei had to stay relatively under wraps to exist in the first place. There have been numerous crackdowns on Danmei content, and forced removals or censorships on sites that hosted the media for it, which caused concern for authors' safety and sent many series into indefinite hiatus or changed completely to meet censorship guidelines. Jinjiang actually enacted a reporting system in order to be proactive towards government regulations and encourage readers themselves to flag down any transgressions of the rules to government censors. They banned, and I quote, any depictions of body parts below the neck. Like, imagine typing the word nipple on Wattpad and suddenly you're banned and reported to the government. However, Danmei's appeal continued to draw in new fans and the fan base flourished despite all of the workarounds. People would employ code words, euphemisms, metaphors, heavy satire in order to avoid detection. More underground websites that could only be accessed via referral code were also established in order to circumvent strict government regulations for content. And in addition to the referral code, you also needed to pass a test that proved your Danmei knowledge in order to be granted access. Danmei lore and history. What is a gong? What is a shou? Who is this character and what novel is he from? Etc, etc. Like, imagine there was a test you needed to pass in order to secretly watch anime because they wanted to prove that you weren't a secret government official that was gonna snitch on them or something. And one of the questions was, who is Itachi Uchiha and what anime is he from? Its popularity in China soon leaked over to a global crowd through Chinese fans and diaspora Chinese fans sharing it with their international friends, fan art, gifs, clips from different Danmei adaptations, manhwa snippets, cosplay photos, and very importantly, fan translations in a bunch of different languages, which through hundreds of hours of hard work done by fans who just wanted to share their favorite pieces of media with more people and have them enjoy it too, made it possible for non-Chinese speaking and reading fans to get into Danmei themselves. The international fandom outside of China was still relatively small at this time, but nevertheless was still incredibly devoted to these stories that captured their hearts and thrust them into a whole new world. The 2018 C-drama Guardian, which was based on the Danmei novel of the same name, cinched Danmei's lucrative potential. And while the series was removed from Youku, one of China's top video streaming websites, despite watering down the romance to be platonic in order to get around censorship, fans would discuss the series' homoerotic subtext on social media under the hashtag Socialist Brotherhood in order to get past government censors. And then, in 2019, The Untamed happened. The Untamed, the live-action drama adaptation of MXTX's Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, MDZS. Its hit status essentially did what BTS did for the K-pop industry, in that it paved the way for other Danmei adaptations to reach success worldwide. It went on to win 2019's Asian Drama of the Year and essentially took over social media from the end of 2019 onwards through 2020. Fans loved the chemistry between the actors, the depth portrayed in the characters, the raw emotions, the political intrigue. The pacing and special effects had more of a mixed reception. What really shined was the relationships both platonic and romantic between characters. The donghua, which premiered in 2018, had its second season released in August 2019, which further added to MDZS mania, and caught the attention of anime fans and anyone with a soft spot for animation. The MDZS audio drama also had its third season finish in October of 2019. It was a full multimedia sweep. People would see these gorgeous men with long flowing hair and beautiful clothing flying around each other, fighting, staring each other down, and be like, oh. And that of course led to those who fell hard for the characters and the story to seek out fan translations of the novel and go even deeper. Thanks to MDZS/The Untamed's large success, Danmei started becoming more prevalent in fan spaces online and IRL. Wangxian, MDZS's main pairing, managed to snag a spot in the top 100 ships on AO3 and Tumblr in 2019. You started seeing cosplayers pop up at cons in billowy hanfu and long wigs, which I'm sure they were very worried about tangling. GIF sets, analyses, fan art, fanfic, edits, Danmei recommendations all started taking over social media. Even if you had no idea what it was, you'd be like, oh yeah, those guys with the super long, elaborate hairstyles, there's the one in white with the Care Bear stare and the guy in black tooting the flute, they're in love? Couldn't tell. Heaven Official's Blessing, also known as TGCF, was MXTX's third novel that finished publication in 2018 and earned the highest ever point score on Jinjiang Literature City, which measures how popular a novel is on the website. TGCF was further bolstered by MDZS hype at the time and shot further into stardom after its manhwa was released in October 2019. Its donghua premiered in October 2020, later becoming available on Netflix and getting an English dub in November 2021. Its live action called Eternal Faith began production in 2021, but we still have yet to see what's gonna happen with it. The Husky and his white cat Shizun, aka Tuha, has had a widely anticipated drama adaptation called Immortality that finished filming in September 2020, but unfortunately, due to new government bans, has been indefinitely delayed. The novel Faraway Wanderers by Priest got its own drama adaptation called Word of Honor that released in May 2021, and was quickly devoured by fans who were craving more wuxia and senxia Danmei adaptations. Despite budget restrictions, it was praised for its script writing, fight scenes, costuming, and the very blatant, palpable romance between the two leads. And then, at the end of 2021, a new big wave of fans rushed in when MXTX's 3 novels, all of which are prominent in the Danmei sphere, although fans of Scum Villain, her first novel, tend to joke/complain that It always gets the short end of the stick compared to its younger siblings, Donghua Season 2 when. But yeah, those 3 novels got officially picked up and were translated and distributed in English. They all became New York Times bestsellers, and you can now find them at your local Barnes & Nobles. Their in-store section always varies though. Some stores have them in the manga/graphic novel section. Sometimes they get their own little shelf, other times they're kind of like in the corner in a pile somewhere. Some are put in the young adult section, occasionally they'll be on the dreaded book talk table. It's always a surprise when you're on the hunt looking for them, and sometimes they'll jump scare you in the wild, but like in a good way. More and more people started seeing these books in stores or online, stumbling across animations and dramas and manhwas on social media, beginning to read the novels, posting about it on Twitter, creating fan content for it on Instagram, raving about it or making skits about it on TikTok, making or buying cosplays. You get the picture. Keep in mind that this was all happening during the inside times, so a lot of folks were hankering for something to occupy their time and new content to give them brain rot. And pretty boys dancing around each other with their swords out was just the ticket. And here we are now, through lots of new content being released in the span of a couple years, many of which were adaptations of the same story, its incredible and continuous stream of fan content worldwide, international accessibility, and a dash of global pandemic, Danmei has made its way out of relative obscurity into the fandom limelight. Now, why do people like it so much? What's the appeal? There's a fair bit of overlap between why people enjoy Danmei and why people enjoy BL as a whole, and I'm gonna do a whole video talking about gay shipping in depth sometime, but right now I'm going to focus more on the Danmei part of it. And bear in mind that Danmei is a very wide umbrella and I don't want to paint it all with one broad stroke. But these are common reasons readers state why they enjoy the genre so much, specifically with the media that's so well renowned. It's just fun. It can be simple as that. The story, the plot. Listen, I'm sure some of you are like, oh, getting into Chinese BL for the plot? Pfft, yeah, sure, right. But believe it or not, Danmei stories are actually really plot-centric. They go hard. From political intrigue to perilous revenge quests to murder mysteries to trying to regain one's honor, the romance aspect of it is, and very important, do not get me wrong, but it's simply one element of a whole machine that has to work together in order to captivate the reader and bring it all together. In a metaphor, I like to think of it as cooking. You can have great flavor when enjoying a juicy romance, but if there's nothing really to support it, then it's not gonna fill you up. It's like eating, I don't know, seasoning packets. Whereas an awesome story is fantastic and will get the job done, but if readers want some sort of romance and aren't getting it, it can taste like you're eating something without any seasoning. Not very satisfying in the end. Danmei novels much of the time are insanely fleshed out and intricate. They can be pretty hefty lengthwise. For example, Tuha is over 3,000 pages long. Danmei fans have joked that finally getting to the romantic relationship in a Danmei novel is a reward for going through hundreds and hundreds of chapters of story. And by the time the romance finally happens, it's bolstered up so beautifully by the events of the plot that the love story itself has depth and the chance to really blossom. Again, it's the whole package. Besides that, readers have also praised wuxia and xianxia Danmei in particular for its nice blend of realism and fantasy elements and the balance between the two. The characters. What's great about the characters, specifically the leads, is just, again, how much depth they have. Because the stories tend to be so beefy, we really get the chance to see the characters grow and develop over the course of their journeys. They make mistakes, their morals and beliefs are often challenged, they're fleshed out well with good insight to their psychology. You really come to feel for and understand them, feel sympathy for when they're going through it, and rejoice when they finally have something good happen to them. And while characters can certainly fall under a certain type, they're rarely two-dimensional, and they still have layers and facets present that go into why they are the way they are. The romance. Danmei romance can be summarized plainly as an idealistic relationship between two people. Romantic, idyllic, dreamy, it gives readers something to wish for and fantasize about. The amount of times you'll hear Hualien, the couple from Heaven Official's Blessing, invented love. Find someone that would wait 800 years for you like Hua Chong did for Xilian. My standards for love are forever ruined thanks to insert Danmei couple here. The devotion, the pining, the yearning, the whole journey of finding love and a home in each other. It's very visceral, so intense, you're just left sitting there like, oh, they cannot be real right now. I mean, obviously they're not, they're characters, but like, are you kidding me? The setting. Since Danmei has a wide variety of different times and worlds it can take place in, you can have anything from a modern setting similar to the one we live in, to a faraway fantasy, ancient, alternate universe to a galactic space adventure. Rich world building is a staple in this genre. With danmeis that take place in a wuxia or xianxia setting, it offers an excellent historical fantasy universe alternative and change of pace to like the sort of Western medieval inspired fantasy setting you'd see in like D&D, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, which are awesome in their own right with their world building, but again, variety is nice, and some people find it interesting and fascinating to learn about a new magic system as well. The mythology is also really cool. Wuxia and xianxia draw upon cultivation, which is essentially growing, cultivating mythical abilities like immortality or special powers through practicing martial and spiritual arts. There's lots of different flavors of cultivation stories as well, many authors putting their own spin on how they cultivate their work. The tropes. There's a lot of tropes that make constant appearances in danmei media. Some are universally loved, some are more hit or miss, some are the bread and butter of people's enjoyment of danmei in the first place, and others, another cup of tea. Prevalent tropes include enemies to lovers, rivals to lovers, reincarnation, slow burn, transmigration, which is when someone from one universe is sent to another, think isekai, the misunderstood character finally getting peace or revenge, the hated or shunned character becoming successful in the end, one or both of the love interests being completely oblivious to their feelings, pining, so much pining, red, blue, and black-white color schemes for the couples, two broken people finding home in one another, and shizun which is like a master-disciple dynamic. This one could be pretty polarizing. The culture. Danmei is produced in China and thus features elements from the East Asian cultural sphere. So it appeals to a lot of Asian people who were brought up in this culture and enjoy learning about its history, religions, societies, etc. As for its international appeal, it speaks to a lot of diaspora Asians in particular, myself included, who can find it difficult to relate to certain aspects of Western culture or want something that speaks more to their cultural roots. Many Chinese American fans, for example, enjoy it as a way to stay connected to their heritage and language in a way that's fun for them. For non-Chinese fans, many fall in love with the culture through their exposure to it from danmei. Some even take the plunge to try to learn Mandarin, one of the trickiest languages to master, mind you, so they can really grasp and understand the original text and dialogue better, and so they can enjoy the content without a language barrier, and I applaud them for it. It's gay. Queer people like to read queer stories, and with worlds as vibrant as the ones you find in danmei, it's no surprise that anyone craving a good LGBT romance with an engaging plot and setting would be drawn to danmei. While the genre does have its faults, which we'll get into in a sec, it's still beloved by lots of LGBT folks around the world who crave heartfelt queer romances between two leads when unfortunately they could be hard to find or just really poorly done. As for the people who aren't under the queer umbrella but still enjoy danmei, it appeals to them because they can still see themselves in one or both of the lead characters, and romance is romance. Some force of the universe wanted these two people to be together, regardless of gender. They're just meant to be. How it handles sexuality. The relationships in many danmei don't often feature heavier themes such as painful coming outs, discrimination, internalized self-loathing and angst, which believe me, there's still plenty of in danmei. It's just not usually linked to their sexuality. The never-ending, often heartbreaking, or just plain exhausting fights regarding legislation surrounding sexuality and gender throughout the world, all of which are extremely real and important to acknowledge, and it can be cathartic and relatable for people to see those struggles portrayed in media. But they can also be a lot for someone who just wants to sit back, take a breath, forget about the world for a bit, and peer into an alternate, idyllic universe. Danmei offers a fun time and escapism for those who just want to enjoy a fantastical story where the characters going on adventures together happen to be gay and in love and no one bats an eye, and that's that. Related to the prior points, danmei also lets people explore their sexuality in a safe, controlled environment. Fans have stated that they found out they were queer after getting into danmei, gaining exposure to gay relationships in media. Many women in particular enjoy danmei, the majority of which is actually written by other women, as a way to enjoy romance without any of the uncomfortable gender stuff. A lot of women in straight romance stories unfortunately fall into a few very cut and dry categories. It can be difficult to find stories where both characters in a relationship feel like they're well-balanced and on genuine equal footing. With danmei, or BL in general, there's also the absence of the male gaze. An example being gratuitous fan service or oogly shots of the female love interest. With China in particular, whose society highly favors men and women are expected to fall under strict conservative gender norms or become leftover women, danmei existing in the first place goes against heteronormative societal ideals and gives Chinese women the chance to explore the sexuality sexuality and rebel against the gender hierarchy through fandom. So when the romance is between two men, all of this uncomfortable stuff that is attached to being a woman is absent. Relationship dynamics. Again, because both characters are men, there's room to explore power dynamics and romance outside of gender roles. These relationships are also often depicted through a soft, romantic, rose-tinted lens, soaked with hidden glances, hands clenching, all sorts of subtle gestures that eventually culminate. The aesthetics. The characters are insanely pretty, obviously. And having two very attractive guys make goo-goo eyes at each other as their hair blows gently in the wind gets a lot of people's hearts racing. It's like, what's better than one delicious Kit Kat bar? Two delicious Kit Kat bars. What's that? They're in love? Sweet. Now they're melting all over each other because they're both so hot. The language used in Danmei as well can come off as very flowery, lyrical, poetic, which further adds to this whole beautiful aesthetic thing. It's not afraid to get dark and gritty. Danmei can get intense. Gore to crazy battles to spooky stuff to existential dread. Writers rarely shy away from the opportunity to showcase their action and horror chops in their stories. There's often spice involved, mild or scorching, and sometimes you just want a nice hearty dose of smut, or at the very least allusions to it. Thanks, censorship. It's the combinations of these elements that really make Danmei so enjoyable for the fans of it. It's just subjective mixing and matching. I discovered Danmei in 2019 when I kept on seeing all these GIFs and fan art for MDZS and The Untamed, and a few of my friends fell headfirst into it, and I explored it a bit in 2020, but I knew that once I got into it, I'd get sucker punched, so I held off for a little bit. But then at the end of 2021, I saw this guy for sale. Heaven Official's Blessing. A god fallen, a ghost risen. I read the first book in a couple of days. I managed to get my hands on an old fan-translated copy from a friend of mine, and I finished the entire thing in like a week. To be fair, I was doing absolutely nothing but reading that week. It was like the week after New Year's, so I was just like in the zone. Heaven Official's Blessing is longer than the Bible, guys. Brain rot fully took over. After I could take a breath from my TGCF obsession, I bit the bullet and read MDZS. Gobbled up all the adaptations for those two novels. I'm currently reading Scum Villain and Tuha, and I can't wait to dig into Thousand Autumns and Faraway Wanderers. I watched the first 4 or 5 episodes of Word of Honor. I have yet to get more into it, but I'm really excited to see the story pick up. I've pulled numerous friends into the depths of Danmei with me. Artist friends, weeb friends, IRL friends, online friends. One of my childhood friends, a Mormon elementary school teacher, one of the sweetest, most upstanding people I know, saw me talking about Wang Xian in one of my YouTube videos and then went out and bought the novels and watched the Donghua and the Untamed, asked me for fic recs. I was like, oh Lord, what have I done to you? I am so sorry. But speaking of fics, let's go ahead and go into some statistics and take a look at Danmei's fanfic metrics and see how the fandom ranks amongst other popular fandoms. So we already mentioned MDZS's Wang Xian getting into the top 100 ships on AO3 and Tumblr in 2019, coming in at number 74 as a brand new entry for both. In 2020, it got to number 2 on AO3's top 100 ships of the year and number 35 on AO3's top ships of all time. That is a big jump. On Tumblr, it was number 13 in the top 100 ships of the year. In 2021, it was number 3 on AO3's top ships of the year and rose to number 18 on AO3's top ships of all time. On Tumblr, it was number 14 in the top 100 ships of the year. In 2022, it remained at number 3 on the top ships of the year on AO3 and rose to number 5 on AO3's top ships of all time. Remember Sexy Times with Wang Xian, the fic that's the reason why AO3 has a tag limit now? It's that Wang Xian. There's another Wang Xian fic that's the reason why AO3's banned in China, but we'll get to that in another video, rest assured. Hualian from Heaven Official's Blessing was number 57 as a new ship entry on AO3's top 100 ships of the year in 2022. It got number 55 on Tumblr's top 100 ships in 2021 and number 40 on Tumblr's top 100 ships in 2022. Wenzhou from Word of Honor was number 100 on AO3's top ships of the year in 2021. Just barely squeaking in. And then it shot up the ranks in 2022 at number 63. It also hit number 96 on the top 100 ships on Tumblr in 2021. For the larger Danmei sub-fandoms on AO3, as of making this video, there are currently around 65,000 fics for MDZS, 14,000 fics for TGCF, 15,000 fics for Scum Villain, 6,500 fics for Word of Honor, and 3,300 fics for Tuha. Something incredible about the Danmei fandom is just how warm and welcoming and helpful it is. Like, I remember when I first got into TGCF, I was like, yo, this is amazing, I want more! So many lovely fans were so eager to reach out and chat, talk about their favorite Danmeis and recommend stuff, share awesome fan content, and just enthuse about this shared story we loved so much. Hyping up their favorite authors, sending over resources so we can understand the content better. Whenever I had a question of how like cultivation worked or what these abbreviations meant, and there are a lot of abbreviations in Danmei, it's a running joke in the fandom, someone would always be super happy to show me the ropes. The excitement, the camaraderie, the passion was palpable. All these artists who saw these vivid scenes and were like, yo, I gotta make art for this. Or the fake writers who saw these rich worlds and were like, okay, time to add my own spins on it. It just made me feel very inspired. Danmei has been cited by a lot of fans, especially those in more conservative countries with less access to LGBT content and resources, as how they discovered they were queer. And since all these novels, shows, webcomics, audio dramas are geared towards an older audience, the community itself tends to be more on the mature side. You constantly see Danmei fans talking about moving their fan content around life events like weddings, graduations, pregnancies, moving homes. Sorry I couldn't update the fan comic today, guys. My daughter has just entered the teething phase and sleep has been rough. Finally finished school! I'm officially a physician's assistant. Thank you so much, everyone, for believing in me. I really, really appreciate it. Anyway, here's an in-depth analysis on the significance of the color white in chapter 457 of BBL. Talking more with the fans, I learned that so many of them have made lifelong friends thanks to Danmei, some traveling thousands of miles to go to cons and meetups and other Danmei events, and some have actually met their partners through the fandom. And since Danmei is adored globally, you have all of these fans from all these different countries in the world coming together and sharing their cultures with one another, all while engaging with and enjoying Chinese culture through the media they love. It's incredible, beautiful stories with incredible, beautiful characters, plus an incredible, beautiful community. But just like any other fandom that gets really big in the span of a relatively short time frame, the Danmei fandom has experienced its fair share of growing pains, and is currently going through more now. From the beginning, the Danmei fandom has had its fair share of discourse and messy fights. Really messy fights. On Jinjiang Literature City, if not-so-nice readers stumble across content they're not fond of, be it because it contains smut or they don't like the top-bottom dynamics, more on that in a sec, they'll report the content to the site as sort of a form of self-censorship, and that they're hoping the content is banned and the author gets punished by Chinese party-state censorship. It's a form of fandom purity culture that's taken to a whole other level. And then there was and still is a lot of infighting in terms of pitting novels and stories against each other, like X novel is way better than Z novel, and Z novel is stupidly overrated. Much of the strife came from MDZS and the Untamed catapulting Danmei into stardom, and so whenever new people would enter the fan base, some fans would be like, oh, of course you're into Danmei now because of MDZS and the Untamed, you normie. This ire has extended to MXTX's works as a whole in the past couple of years because her works are very easily accessible and have a lot of exposure, and so a lot of Danmei fandom pockets are very focused on MXTX's stories. And then on the flip side, you would have fans of MDZS and the Untamed who thought that Danmei started and ended with MDZS and the Untamed, and would be like, oh, there's other Danmei stories out there? Well, it can't be as good as MDZS, obviously. It could best be summarized as sort of the fandom typical mainstream versus hipster sort of deal, like, oh, are you really a true Danmei fan if you only know MXTX's stories? Heaven Official's Blessing, however, has started to become the gateway drug for international fans getting into Danmei since like late 2021, early 2022. What's kind of peculiar though is that some fans actually praise it and hold it over other Danmei novels, not necessarily because of its story or its characters, but because of its lack of explicit sexual content in the main novel. The extra chapters are a different story. To this crowd, because of its lack of smut, it was deemed a pure, wholesome, sexless text, and therefore automatically better than other gross Danmei with explicit content in it. Now, it's one thing if smut just isn't your thing, if you prefer to skip over it or it makes you uncomfortable, that is completely understandable. There's lots of reasons as to why people are not comfortable with it, and that needs to be respected. It's another thing entirely to state that anything without smut is de facto better than anything with smut, especially since, as much of this crowd doesn't seem to know, or if they do know, then they're happy about it, the reason for the relative lack of spice is because of the Chinese government censorship cracking down on anything deemed undesirable in media, undesirable referring to anything non-heteronormative. A similar crowd also praised The Untamed for not having anything more than intense subtext suggesting that the characters were attracted to one another, and while I love some good subtext, I'm not fond of it replacing an actual full-fledged relationship in the source material because it was deemed undesirable. Something else that happens frequently is that fans don't often read the novels, which serve as the source material, which I can completely understand. They're hefty and Wikipedia is literally right there. But many fans instead rely heavily on fandom and fanon in order to understand the original story, which, if you know fanon, isn't exactly accurate most of the time, and so can lead to a lot of misunderstandings. Fighting over proper characterization, misconstruing character motivations, not knowing about important plot points, and you're left with these pointless, messy situations where fans will be fighting and they're both acting like a Danmei authority when in reality, they're just taking headcanons as gospel, just yelling at each other with absolutely no idea of what they're actually yelling at each other about. I just feel like a lot of fans like to yell. There's also the top-bottom points of contention to tackle, and it's the reason some people aren't fond of Danmei, or BL in general. Wow, I can't believe I'm going into depth about this. For those who don't know, in queer relationships, people can identify with certain roles based on what they prefer to do in intimacy. A top gives, a bottom receives, and it doesn't necessarily correspond to dominance or submission. You could be a dominant or submissive top, a dominant or submissive bottom. There's power bottoms, service tops. You get the picture. And a switch, or verse, is someone who switches between being a top and being a bottom. Danmei actually has specific terms for these roles: gong, which is the top, or the attacker, and then shou, which is the bottom, or the receiver. Danmei content will often have a clear dominant top character and a clear submissive bottom character, which many argue is inconsistency with the standard heterosexual hierarchy in relationships, where men are the more dominant ones and women are the more submissive ones, and thus Danmei relationships can fall under heteronormativity. Others will counter that top-bottom roles don't necessarily align with typical male-female characterization, and these relationships can't be heteronormative in the first place because they're between two men. The two sides of the argument basically boil down to Danmei relies heavily on heteronormative dynamics where the bottom is for all intents and purposes treated as a woman during intimacy, which doesn't align with actual gay relationships and is essentially fetishizing gay men. Actual real-life queer people have top-bottom preferences. It's normal and okay. Plus, stating that the character who's bottoming is weaker or inferior to the top because they're basically a woman is not only offensive, but misogynistic. And then we also have, well, why can't both of the characters in the relationship be switches? That way they're on equal footing without any of this weird top-bottom stuff. Not everyone likes being a switch, and sex positions don't define equality in a relationship. Again, these fights can get messy, and nuance, like in most contexts online, can be hard to find when you're scrolling through TikToks or reading a Twitter thread. Then there's the fights over the actual dynamics themselves, where fans will get wildly heated over defending the canon dynamics versus switching it up or reversing them. They can get really defensive in their takes, be it upholding the intended top-bottom relationship of canon to screw canon, it's fandom, I'm gonna make this character the top. It's just strange, especially when it's so easy to ignore, mute, or block creators and content you don't like because of the dynamic, and it's fine having a preference, but it's another thing to harass and be really aggressive towards people because of it. Connected to the top-bottom discussion is the topic of fetishization. Some readers feel that many women readers enjoy Danmei because they fetishize male-male relationships. To be completely fair, there are fans out there that are strangely fixated on male-male relationships and only male-male relationships. Sometimes to the point where they'll aggressively demand Danmei cosplayers to kiss, they'll send death threats to those who don't agree with their top-bottom preferences, just really creepy, delusional behavior. But this tightening assumption of you like Danmei because you're a filthy fetishizer female unfortunately can lead to the harassment of any fans who are women, regardless of their sexuality, in online spaces. Many women in the Danmei community are immediately assumed to be straight, which isn't assuming people's sexuality something we're trying to avoid. A lot of non-binary, trans, and asexual fans have been the target of this harassment, only to be told, oh, whoops, when confronting these troublemakers. Also, if they are straight, why is that instantly a problem when they just want to enjoy Danmei content? Aren't we trying to normalize queer media, and thus have people who aren't queer themselves be open to it and enjoy it as well? The word fetishize is often redefined in context to BL to mean enjoying content with male-male relationships for reasons I don't understand or like. like. It's sad that even with all the reasons of why and how Danmei appeals to all sorts of people, some folks will still point fingers and mob mentality takes root. Which I honestly find pretty ironic because the dangers of mob mentality is a prominent theme found in many Danmei works, and I wonder if the same harassment would extend to any straight guys who happen to like Danmei. It sometimes feels like this bizarre attempt to create a no girls allowed club. Bizarrely, there have been instances of newer fans not realizing that the authors of their favorite Danmei stories happen to be women, and then when they inevitably find out, they'll immediately start trashing them and anyone who likes their works while proceeding to still secretly enjoy it in private. It's also crapping on the authors themselves, who could very well be in the closet because of safety reasons in a very strict heteronormative society. And then, crazily enough, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are actually Danmei fans out there who are legit homophobic. They'll only like gay relationships depicted in fiction. IRL gay relationships are deemed to be gross and ugly. They'll like the textual idea of it, but not the reality. It's just a really weird disconnect to have, like watching a Danmei drama with two men making goo-goo eyes at each other and then sneering at two real men making goo-goo eyes at each other. Like, what are you doing here? And then of course there's people who dislike Danmei because they're homophobic and celebrate whenever there's new government measures or bans that erases, again, any media content that's not heterosexual. Now for the age dilemma. A big problem is that a lot of popular Danmei content will have age restrictions, an example being the novels, which are often 17+ or rated R, due to mature themes, graphic violence, and sexual content. But of course, many kids in the fandom sphere end up stumbling across beautiful fan art, edits, animatics, other fan content, they see people talking about it, and they end up getting into it because the characters are gorgeous and the story's cool. To be completely honest, if you got into fandom when you were young, chances are you wandered into adult spaces when you weren't supposed to. Just like checking off the yes, I am 18+ on fanfic sites, ignoring content warnings, lying about your age and briefly feeling guilty and then having your mind blown. Most people are pretty curious about this stuff when they're growing up. But what's funny is that, and this is gonna have its own video about fandom and age at some point, that awareness of, hey, I'm doing something naughty and I gotta be sneaky, is not as prominent nowadays. And instead of keeping mum about the fact that they're too young to be reading these books and consuming content for these stories, they'll essentially tell themselves when they get outraged and are like, these books are bad because of X, Y, and Z reasons, and if you like them, then you're a horrible person. And then you go to their online bio and find out they're only like 14. It's like a minor kicking down the door of a Bevmo and being like, why is there alcohol here? This is not unique behavior in any fandom. It's everywhere. Unfortunately, they lack the maturity to engage with the content or use bashing it as a way to get social currency with their online peers. Oh yeah, and racism. Racism against Asians and a fandom created and cultivated by Asians. Again, make it make sense. Yeah, you'll find people who make fun of character names or the way Mandarin sounds, disrespecting cultural elements like spiritual beliefs and family traditions, criticizing and even changing elements deemed too foreign for international fans to fully grasp. There's also those who make absolutely no attempt to even acknowledge the culture. Like, it's one thing to have characters be in AUs, different settings, worlds, eras. I personally love fan works that take place in a sort of modern diaspora setting because it's relatable for me. I get to see the characters I love go through similar identity struggles. But sometimes you'll stumble across fan art or fanfics where the fact that these characters are Chinese is just blatantly ignored or even erased. Like, for all intents and purposes, they're now Xander Lewis and Hugo Charleston. And then when Asian fans start voicing their concerns over cultural context being erased, content being handled poorly, or just people being really disrespectful and rude, there's people that come out of the woodwork like, stop trying to gatekeep and preach what's right or wrong just because you're Asian. You have people from the culture of the media you're consuming telling you something you're not doing right, and that's how you react? There's also a whole discussion about hanfu in regards to wearing it properly and the cosplay community. I am not Chinese myself, and I know that many Chinese fans have varying opinions on it, so if you want to offer your 2 cents and have knowledge about it, then feel free to do so in the comments. Now, to be clear, the majority of the Danmei fandom is totally fine. All the unsavory stuff I talked about is pretty controlled. I just wanted to make sure that I gave a big picture view of the entire fandom. I didn't want to only talk about the good parts or only talk about the bad parts. That's just fandom. People's people's experiences will vary. Danmei has come a long way from being an underground literature genre hiding from censorship to being widely available in bookstores around the world. Though currently Danmei novel adaptations are on pause because of the government banning anything depicting men in any way abnormally aesthetic or not manly enough because it's somehow contributing to declining reproduction rates. There have also been recent reports about China gearing up to compete against K-dramas and other Asian media within the next year or so. So keep an eye out, hope and pray for more potential Danmei adaptations. And many more Danmei novels are currently in the process of being translated and are slated to release throughout the next few years. Thank you so much for watching. Holy hell, this video is long. I hope you learned something new, or at the very least enjoyed this deep dive into Danmei. Are you a Danmei fan yourself? What are your thoughts on the genre? Do you have a favorite novel or donghua or drama? If you have anything to add or any commentary on something I mentioned in the video, then feel free to leave it in the comments. Thank you again so much for watching. I'm gonna read some MDCS fanfic before I go to bed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!